Hello, everyone. Welcome to Sit and See. I'm Dr. Jared Jones. My research specialties are ancient systems of meditation, the cognitive science of meditation, Buddhist philosophy, and the philosophy of science. I've been a Buddhist for about 20 years, practicing in a pretty traditional environment, and have been training in Taoism for another six, overlapping with that. If this is your first time or you stumble on this video later, I'm on a bit of a mission to teach people from all different backgrounds the types of skills that are required to train in meditation as a layperson living in the real world. So I've designed a set of practices. There are four of them divided over five different circumstances, you could say. Um, Good. I'm glad the mic sounds good. This was actually recommended by my teacher. One of my teachers does a lot of work in tech, and he said, "This is it." So I may just switch over to using this thing full time. Well, in any case, so here we are. We're training in meditation as lay people, and I've designed a number of practices in one package and put them together so that you can make progress as a layperson living in the real world. And yeah, so far so good. People seem to be making use of them, and they seem to be working for people quite well, and that makes me happy. So in the sit and see classes, a little bit different than my open Q&As or live or sort of asynchronous content, what I what I do is just answer questions about people's meditation practice, or whatever background you happen to be coming from is fine, because the skills of training in concentration are universal. The techniques are not universal, but the skill of gaining concentration is universal. So if you have questions about your actual practice, I'm happy to offer what advice I can. And then after we've done some Q&A, we'll jump over to doing our actual practice for the day. And then as a special treat after class today, this stream will immediately push you over to a film. So we're gonna do a movie night after this class. So while I'm waiting for questions to come in, a couple quick announcement. Dr. Abhishek, who's a Vedanta practitioner, Advaita Vedanta practitioner, and scholar of religion, and so on and so forth. He was meant to come on a couple of weeks ago, and he's had a couple of emergencies since then, and then we rescheduled for a few days ago, and once again, unfortunately, he had something come up, so he's having a bit of a rough time at the moment. So I'm going to have him on when I can. I've taken down that announcement, but it's still sort of archived for when he's ready and able to come on. And I'm reaching out to a number of other practitioners. There's a wonderful Sikh practitioner that I'm reaching out to, who has a number of practices coming through his Sikh tradition that are also Advaita Vedanta. And there's a Chan practitioner I've reached out to, and yeah, so I'm excited to see potentially once again trying to bring more practitioners of more of these arts onto the podcast to talk about what it's like to, as best you can, struggle to maintain good character, good ethics, and so forth as a real person living in the real world, and along with this, training and concentration, which is universal as a human being. So, with a bit of luck, there'll be more interesting podcast guests coming in the next few weeks. Jonathan, welcome. Oates, welcome. I'm glad that the new mic once again sounds good. It's a pretty cool mic, actually. It's very low profile. I can stand up and walk around the room. I can walk halfway around my house through bricks and you can still hear the signal coming from this. So unlike the other things that I've tried, even though I now look like a motivational speaker or something, uh, I think in the long run this will be the best way to do it. The sound quality is just, I mean, I hope you'll agree. Sound quality is quite good, and I can walk around the room and do our practices together, and that's the idea. So, okay. Does anyone have questions or anything at this time? I had an interesting conversation today with a young Sikh practitioner, and we were talking about meditation in the Sikh tradition. And I've always been curious about this because I studied a bit of Sikh religion as an academic. You know, if you're doing religious studies, and my degree crosses over between religious studies and philosophy. So this is where I come in, right? Is at this intersection of religious practice and philosophy. And so I spent quite a bit of time just reading about and learning about global religion as part of my general degree, my general studies. So I got to study a bit of Sikh religion and had a couple of Sikh practitioners in my school when I was growing up as well. And one of them, you know, it was quite a small school, so we were a bit of friends, not super close friends, but we were friends. Everybody was kind of friends because the school was so small. And yeah, I've always been fascinated to learn more, but it's quite difficult. Um, it's quite difficult to find good resources translated into English and so forth for the tradition. And so I got a chance to talk to somebody who's quite competent and knows their stuff for the first time in a long time. It was quite interesting. So basically, his opinion was there used to be much more teaching on meditation in the Sikh tradition, but there are some texts that are now considered to be a bit apocryphal that are attributed to the founder or one of the early gurus in the tradition in the line. And and so some groups of Sikhs, I guess, do a lot of meditation, and some of them don't do as much. Is the impression that I came away with. That might be wrong, but that's how he sort of framed it up. And the primary practice that they use is actually relying on mantra, which is, again, it's a very skillful technique. But we were talking about it today. It's just, you know, if you don't have a lot of the other moving parts of meditation, you can get stuck at various stages of training using a mantra, for example, and you won't know you've gotten stuck unless it's there, unless somebody knows and they tell you. Yeah. So just checking the chat. Want to make sure that I'm not missing anything coming in. Oh, good. The chat is live. I do work with Jogsen Mahamudra, and at times throughout the day, I'll remind myself to look at my mind, and it feels like kind of I'm not doing anything until I did some of the practices you teach. I kind of feel now like a cloud that illuminates my senses. Yeah, yeah. So this is it. This is, you know, I try not to criticize people. I try to talk about ideas and approaches and techniques that I think don't work under some circumstances, right? And I'm not even saying, for example, that a lot of what's being taught can't work or doesn't work. I'm just saying that there are things that work much more quickly if you're having to do all of this in real life. Because if you can sit in retreat, for example, and say, okay, I'm going to be nice to myself, I'm just going to let my mind calm down, and we'll just let it settle. And, right? If you do that for 6 days, the mind will calm down because you're not stimulating it. You never stir it back up while you're in retreat. And so you can settle it and settle it and settle it and settle it and then get into deeper states of concentration and what have you. But in real life, you go to your cushion and you go, okay, I'm going to be nice to myself. I'm just going to calm, 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 whatever. And then immediately you get out of meditation and you're just stirring the crap out of your mind. And then you go back to meditation the next day. Okay, let's just be nice. And there's not enough time to settle your mind through a technique that doesn't have some chutzpah, right? That doesn't have some force, some cojones. So on the other hand, as you just mentioned, if you do some work to make the mind sharp, controlled, make it go where you want, you do some other work to make it calm down, you do some other work to make it not only calm but highly lucid. Now, these other practices that normally you need to spend probably at least 3 days in retreat getting your mind ready to do, you can start doing them. Maybe not in the middle of your real life right away, but you can at least get into like the real practice of those in one session on your cushion. which means you can actually make progress observing the mind, for example. Just observing your mind. People give this advice all the time. Just sit down and just don't do anything, don't modify anything. Just, you hear this in Dzogchen, you hear it in Mahamudra, you hear it in Zen. Just sit and observe. Don't do anything, don't modify anything, don't make any decision, don't label anything good or bad, just observe. Right? Okay. How the hell do you do that? Because if this is my central mind that I'm trying to observe, this central mind is getting pulled up out of itself by the five senses, and it's running around, bang, 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 in five different directions. And I don't even notice that this is happening. And then on top of that, if we take this mind and sort of turn it sideways, and we're thinking about, okay, now we're just dealing with the central mind only, it has content, and that content it gets involved with and wrestles around with, and mostly it's not able to pull itself apart from that content and just observe it because it's really busy running around to the five senses and then getting involved and then running around to the five senses and getting involved, and then your back hurts. So again, now it's over here with tactile sensation, and then you hear something, right? And your mind is actually just running around the entire session, even if you're sitting there 2 hours. So because of this, the time you actually spend in a state of non-doing is probably very short, maybe non-existent. Because even though you're not deliberately doing anything, the mind itself, which is you, okay, roughly speaking, is creating intention, and it's moving to here and chasing this one. Then it's moving over here and chasing this one. Then and all of those involve the mind noticing something, forming the intent to move, going over here, grabbing onto this thing, elaborating about it, and then seeing something else and go. And so all of that is doing, not resting, not abiding, not merely observing. And since you don't have enough subtlety of awareness to notice that your mind is moving and then wrestling with its contents and moving around and doing all this stuff, you think you're just sitting because you didn't deliberately, intentionally decide to do anything. But that's not non doing. That's not sitting in a state of non meditation as meditation. That's just chasing the bullshit around your mind. It's not that much different than what an ordinary person is doing, actually. You will get a little bit more aware of all this stuff happening if you do that practice, but it's very difficult unless you spend a lot of time with that technique. I think in retreat, actually, to make progress with that technique. On the other hand, consider the pedagogy, the stages of training that I put forward. You put the mind on the breath, great intensity. You make the mind go where you want. Finally, then you do body scanning. Make the mind very calm and the body really comfortable. So the body is less distracted and the mind is more calm. Then you do opening the sense gates, makes the mind highly lucid, highly fresh, and stops the mind from running around to the five senses because you train the mind in becoming aware of each field in its entirety without getting grabbed by the contents and pulled in, right? The mind pulls back like this and it just abides on the whole screen. Well, now, once you've tamed the five senses, you can go like this and pull the awareness inside to observe consciousness because the mind isn't as pulled by each of the senses. And then finally, you observe the contents of consciousness. And at first, it's like this, you can't get your mind apart from it. And then you get a little space and you start to notice, oh, here's the mind moving. And then you're back to this. And then, oh, here's the mind moving. I can see it and I'm not moving with it. And then eventually you get gaps and you start to become aware of what consciousness is like in those gaps where there's no content appearing. And then you start to notice, oh, there's something starting to come up and you can stop it from coming, right? Before, before an actual content comes, there's a process of content arising. And so you can start doing this. So you can maintain the gaps where the content never arises. And now you're abiding on at least this central mind, which is your human consciousness. It's not all the way down here to Rigpa or something, right? But at least you're getting a state of non doing where you're in a state of observation of whatever's occurring in the mind without getting involved in the contents. And now finally you're in a state of non-doing, or relatively speaking, at least. We could have a little bit of debate about how much non-doing you're doing. But it is substantially less doing than you've ever done. And you'll gain deep insight into what your mind is, what mental content is, etc., from this kind of meditation. So now you can see that there's a pathway you can go through from ordinary condition to a mind that is goes where you want, is stable, lucid, and can pull inside and look at consciousness without getting involved in the contents of consciousness. Now finally, you can say, let me just rest and look at the contents of consciousness. I won't modify them. I won't get involved. But look how much work you needed to do to get there. Now, let me compare this against retreat. Okay? You go into retreat and someone says, "Okay, we're just going to sit for 12 hours a day and do your best to not do anything." Okay, fine. Over 12 hours a day, 8 hours a day, 16 hours a day, whatever you're doing, the mind is going to just settle until it enters the state we just talked about, where it's non-reactive to the senses, because you're sitting in the same environment over and over and over again with nothing new happening in the environment. And you're sitting there trying to make the mind aware of its contents without getting involved in them, and the mind is getting more calm because it's less stimulated. So you're getting to that same condition, but it takes you days in retreat with a lot of practice every day. With this approach, you generate all of those same conditions progressively while you're in the midst of real life. If you do foundations 2 and 3, you're learning how to take those skills into other things. So then you're cultivating them between sessions also. Does this make sense? So this really should make your Zen practice better. It really should make your Dzogchen practice better, because you can better prepare the mind for a condition where you're going to try to observe the mind and have it do nothing or do the minimum. Right? And you're definitely right, Jonathan. When you think about the mind moving to different parts of your awareness, it's really like bandwidth on Wi-Fi. It truly is. Like right now, you're streaming 6 different HD services at the same time, with their own sort of world of stuff, of sound, a world of vision. And if you take all the bandwidth and you pool as much of it as you can into vision, for example, then sorry, one second. If you pool as much as you can into vision, for example, then you take that cloud of energetic potential, that cloud of bandwidth, and move it into the vision, and it becomes like ultra HD. I mean, as a matter of fact, yeah, the reason that I say so often that when you focus on the visual field, you'll see white light and gold light and all sorts of stuff, and the colors will increase and all this, because if you don't tell people that, they think that something really special is happening. But it's just that you've put so much more juice into vision that the vision becomes like super HD. So, okay, let me jump over to Jay. Do you think a lot of meditation can make you come off to some as emotionally detached? It can. It can, and it depends on the technique also. I think the Tibetan traditions, the Indo-Tibetan tradition, is a little bit um, more explicit in this regard. But even like if you look at great teachers, great masters from Thailand and so forth, quite often, they're a whole person, so to say. They seem to be emoting a wide range of different states, not just sort of whatever. So if you how do I put this? If the only thing you're doing is training and concentration, you do a huge amount of that. Yes, it has this effect of evening out the emotions. But if you also train in rumination, then you can change the stuff that's on the surface, like we did the last couple days. We did the last couple of days. We did, instead of doing the other practices, right? We did rumination on the motivation for meditation, and we did rumination on preciousness of a human rebirth. And when those become very powerful, then it encourages you to practice, and that is emotional encouragement, not just sort of a dry intellectual thing. And it's pretty explicit in the text that you need to make these feelings so powerful that you're deeply moved by the thought. Because if you're not deeply moved by the thought, it's not going to change your behavior. Does that make sense? And it doesn't, I mean, unless you're sort of like I don't know, you have really good karma or something, that you've done a lot of practice in past lives or whatever. It doesn't just sort of detonate the first time you hear, oh, everyone dies or something, right? And then you're like, okay, yeah, that's true. And nothing happens. There's no movement in your mind because of this thought. Great practitioners who have done a lot of practice in previous lives, they hear these things once, and all of a sudden it's like all of the power, the force, the motivation that they've cultivated in the past comes back sometimes. So yeah, if you want to add on this sort of motivational, emotive component, so that the stuff that occurs on the surface of the mind, instead of just being non-virtue or whatever happens to be there, is humility, willpower, compassion, instead of jealousy, rejoicing, instead of sort of bitter resentment, forgiveness, right? You cultivate these by changing the attitudes that occur on the surface of the mind using reason and observation. And then once, like we did yesterday, the last couple of days, once those new attitudes come up and they're quite strong, powerful, and they sort of fill you up, then you hold it with concentration. Right? Until that's just how you are. You're just a forgiving person now instead of a bitter, resentful person. You're just a loving person now instead of instead of the opposite. Does that make sense? So Sasa asks, "Hi Sasa, welcome. What criteria must an event meet for it to be considered an experience? Explain in detail." There's a couple interesting words in Tibetan. Uh, nyam is one, and they have like this difference. They make this difference, and I haven't studied it in detail with somebody the exact criteria for the difference, but they have these two terms, and one sort of means like the stuff that happens to you when you meditate, where it's like a one-off experience, and it might be even a valid experience of something, or it might just be some of the stuff that happens when you train the mind. And there's this category of sort of temporary meditative experiences and temporary accomplishments that happen when you train in meditation. And then on the other hand, there are these deeper experiences that lead to stable capabilities. So I think a really helpful distinction is, over a period of time, are the things you're doing leading to you being different in real life? And this is part of why it's good to train in real life. So consider, for example, maybe you've been always been a person who gets irritated really easily by other people when they have faults or when they have shortcomings or whatever. I'm not saying that's you, Sasa, but it's a fairly common thing. So maybe you get very frustrated by the shortcomings or confusion of other people, you know? And then you do some practices for patience where you do rumination on patience and you think, instead of instead of regarding people who have shortcomings as a big problem, you see that they're like a treasure for you. They're a treasure for your practice. They're an opportunity for you to cultivate good qualities that you need in order to be successful, both in this life and in future lives and in your practice. That other beings are incredibly precious. And even in your own life, there are so many places where you have shortcomings, where you aren't very good in that area. Right. And so you consider all these reasons that all beings are completely equal in terms of wanting happiness, wanting to be free from suffering. That they're incredibly precious because they bring you benefit both directly and indirectly. And even your enemies, for example, I'll give you this opportunity to train in dealing with difficult circumstances. They're not doing that on purpose, of course, but my goodness, those people that want to harm you, they give you these opportunities to train your mind under a difficult circumstance that you wouldn't normally have. And so, of course, you don't want to have enemies, right? But at the same time, if you train your attitude so that when people who want to harm you appear, or when people who have shortcomings that mess things up that you really hoped wouldn't be messed up or whatever, if you train your mind to have a different attitude, and then you go out in real life and you actually have that new attitude, that's a sign that it's not just sort of like a temporary experience you have on your cushion. It's becoming who you are. It's becoming how you do things when you go out there in the world. Does that make sense? So there's this word realization. If you think about this word for a bit, to become real, realization, to make something that wasn't real, real, to make something that wasn't yet actual, actual. So if you're trying to train in loving kindness, to now jump to Jay's question, yeah, yeah, that's sorry. Yeah, it's true, true. Okay, it's a good point. You know, some people they get more annoyed if you don't get annoyed. It's the best revenge, right? Okay. And anyways, so what does it mean for something to become actual? Where, for example, in a case where you would have normally been unethical, you've accomplished ethics in that area when instead of having the instinct to be unethical in a certain way, in a circumstance where in the past you've been unethical, instead your instinct is to be ethical. Now you have a realization of ethics in that area. Or with loving kindness, yes, Jay, I do. I highly recommend How to Expand Love. Uh, and if you take sort of like we did with the ruminations we did the last couple of days, if you take each one of those sections and don't just read it and go, yeah, that makes sense, but actually think through each piece, each there's if there's 74 pieces in this argument that's being made, you start with the first one and you really think it through until you go, yeah, that's actually right. That's actually how it is. Wow. And then when that realization comes, not when that recognition comes, wow, it is actually like that. Then you hold that with concentration. Now that's the object of concentration. Wow, it is like this. And then without the mind getting distracted, you go to the next point and you consider observations, reasons, you bring in things that are relevant until you go, you know what? I've looked at this and wow, it really is like this. And then when that understanding again is powerful enough to move you emotionally, move your attitude, right? Actually move your attitude, then you hold that with concentration. And then you go to the next point. So just to put it in a little bit of perspective, um, when we did retreat a few months ago, and we did rumination on loving kindness at the end of the retreat. And we did one session where we started with the foundation for loving kindness, then we moved to loving kindness, then we did compassion. We went all the way to what's called bodhicitta, which is the end of that process from Mahayana perspective. And that process, just to get like one little taste of each of the minds that are the actual minds for that practice, took 3 hours. 3 hours of going through the process. This is incredibly difficult to build, and you have just to put it in perspective in a different way. I know a person who there's a mental state you need before metta can occur called equanimity. The specific type of equanimity you need is seeing friends, enemies, and strangers as completely equal in terms of a certain set of criteria. Yes, your friends are different than strangers. Strangers are different than people. People that help you are different than people that harm you, and those are both different than people who do neither. Right? There are real differences. You can't treat the three groups exactly the same. You can't treat someone who's murdering someone exactly the same as someone who's helping carry an old lady's groceries to her car. Right? Those aren't the same. However, in terms of the different layer of attitude that you have in regards to these different categories, there are ways in which all three categories are exactly the same. And so when you start to consider, for example, think, okay, let's do very quick. Maybe we'll and just end up doing rumination meditation before movie night. Which I don't mind at all. I mean, I love these practices. They're so incredible. When you start to see that they're not just sitting there saying words and going, "Oh yes, I hope everyone's happy." When you start to see how profound these things are, it's before you've even gotten into the practices, it makes you want to cry because it's so unbelievably beautiful. You can see how you would go from your ordinary being mind that is totally biased in regards to everyone to a state where you're completely unbiased with regards to other beings and you genuinely want them to do well. And you can see how you could go from a totally ordinary being mind like we have now to the mind of a saint, like an actual saint, you know? Who has universal loving kindness that spreads out to all beings. You can see that pathway once you understand these things, and it's incredibly powerful. It's not flippy floppy at all. Okay, so we'll just do a little bit of equanimity rumination since this is where the conversation has gone. Let me just check the chat and make sure other things didn't come in because I'll answer those first, but then we'll do a rumination today. Okay, Jonathan asks if a Buddhist practitioner can have Ishta Devata. Can you define that for me? I'm not familiar with the term. I ask as I feel very close to a particular Hindu deity and still engage in worship and mantra with that deity. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. So it depends a little bit on who you ask, and it depends on exactly what you mean in that context, exactly what you're doing with those deities. So if you hold Buddhist refuge vows, you can still make offerings and things and even praise other deities from a certain standpoint, but you're not taking refuge in those deities from the bottom of your heart. In the same way that, like, if I had a good friend, I might invite them over for dinner and I would light incense and candles that smell nice. And I might put on some music. I would bring them a glass of water. I'd make them a nice meal. And then at some point in the night, I'll probably say, man, I love you so much. I'm so glad you're here. It's so wonderful I get to spend time with you. Do you know how valuable you are in my life? Right? And then you say things like, wow, I'm so inspired by your good qualities. The way that you do this with people, the way that you do that, the way that you have this thing that happens and the way that you did this thing in the past. Isn't this now starting to sound like a like a sadhana? Okay, you have a particular deity. You're going to make food offering, water offering, incense offering, music offering, light offering, and then you're going to talk about their good qualities and you're going to give them praise. But do you take refuge in your good friend you invited over for dinner? Do you take refuge in them to take you to enlightenment when you do all that? No. As I sometimes say, it's nice to have friends in high places. If you feel a close connection with a particular deity, I don't see any problem being friends with everyone, especially on the bodhisattva path. If that deity is not yet a Buddha, you have a responsibility to bring that being at some time to full enlightenment. You know? So why would you feel distance from from any being that actually exists? If that deity is real, why would you feel distance from that being? You that being has been your mother countless times in countless previous lives. They've been your father. They've been your brother. They've been your sister. They've been your child. And you've been all these things to them. They're completely equal to all other beings in this regard. So you have, why not be friends with them? Why not say nice things about them? Why not invite them over for dinner occasionally and give them nice stuff? As long as in the bottom of your heart you're not going, I'm going to follow you all the way to enlightenment, that's refuge, right? I'm going to follow the triple gem all the way to enlightenment. That's your refuge. So, okay. I hope that makes sense. I hope that makes sense. And actually, if you look at even the Pali Canon, there's all sorts of cases where deities who aren't Buddhists, as far as we know, help the Buddha as a bodhisattva. When he's heading towards enlightenment, there's all sorts of deities who just see him in trouble and they're like, ah, yes, here's this bodhisattva again, about to drown on a ship. Let's make sure that he's able to get back to land. Or, you know, can't remember any other good examples, but, here he is in a burning building. Let me make sure that he gets out of the building or whatever. And there are cases where deities come to the Buddha who, again, ostensibly are not Buddhists, and they say, "Hey, why don't you give some teachings?" Like Brahma, one of the Brahmas comes down and asks the Buddha to give teachings for the first time. And some of the Buddha's students who have clairvoyance through training in the jhanas, they go, sometimes they don't go straight to the Buddha and ask certain questions. They go to a whole bunch of deities who aren't Buddhists, and they say, they'll start at the sort of lower devas, and they'll be like, "Hey, do you know the answer to this question?" And then they'll keep working their way up. There's one really famous sutta that's like this, where a particular monk wanted to know what happens at the end of a universe, like exactly what happens at the end of a universe. So he starts with the lower devas, and he uses his clairvoyance, and he goes and he says, "Okay, so hey, can you tell me what happens?" And they're like, "No, sorry, we don't know. But go see the next level up in the deva hierarchy." And he said, "Okay." So he goes to the next one. "Can you tell me what happens at the end of the universe?" "No, sorry." And so he go. So, anyways, so likewise, I think there's a reason to think it's nice to have friends in high places. Isn't it nice that he could go to beings who might know more than a human being because of how their sensory faculties are set up and because their lifespan's so long, to ask them some questions? And maybe sometimes they're right about stuff, maybe sometimes they're wrong about stuff, just like any other friend that you might have, because they're not Buddhists. They're not highly realized beings. They're just devas. They're just beings who did a huge amount of virtue and trained in jhana and trained in concentration and are now in a really nice condition. So as long as you're not thinking from the bottom of my heart, I'm now taking refuge in this being and this being's going to take me all the way to the highest condition, then I think you're okay. Especially if you're also doing your Buddhist practices that are basically refuge kind of practices. Okay. Mm, all right. So now we'll do a bit of rumination, not even on metta, but on the foundational stuff for metta. Okay. So you can be seated, you can be laying down, you can be standing, doesn't matter so much. But you want to try to keep your mind on the reasons so that each reason uh, sort of lands, each reason lands and strikes you. And for some of you, you may not believe in rebirth or anything yet, or you have doubts about that. That's okay. That's okay. Just consider it an imaginative exercise. If rebirth and so forth doesn't compel you yet, just consider it sort of an if it's like that, then this follows, right? If rebirth is real and infinite, then it follows that such and such and such. I don't know if that's true, but if it's like that, then it is true, right? So just consider it like that. And for those of you who think rebirth is real and the Buddha's probably right that rebirths have no beginning and they're infinite into the past, then certain things logically follow from this. And so that's part of the reasoning that's used to establish the foundation for equanimity. But I'm also going to present some secular reasons along with it. So for those of you who don't accept all that, there's still something for you to chew on. Okay? So just sit down, try to get the mind a bit calm. We'll place the mind on the breath for not very long, just a little while, intensive breath, maybe a few breaths, just to get the mind inside. So bring the mind to the sensations of the breath like we usually do. Place the mind on the breath with great intensity and count from 1 to 7, 7 to 0 as you count on the out breath. And I'll just start the rumination after a few minutes of intensive breath meditation, okay? So 3, 2, 1, begin. So, first, just bring to mind someone that you're very close to who's helped you a lot, someone very precious to you. And notice that if you imagine that this person did something really bad, something really harmful, that feeling of closeness would also be damaged by that, right? If you imagine that if they cheated on you with your romantic partner, or if they stole a bunch of money, or they made you lose your job out of malice. And so this feeling of closeness you have for this person is mainly dependent upon a temporary circumstance in which they continue to benefit you and they continue to not harm you. So this is a very unstable foundation for feeling close to this person. All of us probably have had, if you've lived long enough, you've had a friend who you were very close to who then hurt you quite badly, at least at one period. Or you had someone else close to you who at first was very trustworthy and good, and you felt very safe and close and so forth, and then they hurt you very badly. So like this, the normal feeling of closeness that we have that's based upon people benefiting us is very unstable. And in reality, the people around us that are helpful, beneficial, they could harm us at some time, and then this feeling of closeness we have would go away. So this is very unstable. Likewise, consider that isn't it true that every friend you have that's not a family member, right? Every friend you have was once a stranger. So think about someone you saw in the last couple weeks, a stranger that really stood out to you for some reason. Maybe it was because of how they dressed, or I don't know, not someone that annoyed you and not someone you were attracted to, just someone you didn't really care how it turns out. Like you wouldn't mind if they were happy, you wouldn't mind if they were unhappy. There's just someone sort of random, right? Someone you saw walking down the street the opposite way from you, who you didn't think twice about at the time. Isn't it true that every friend you've ever had started like this? Where you didn't, it was somebody that you were totally indifferent to their world, and then somehow you collided, right? You collided somehow, and then you started feeling close. So every friend you've ever had has been a stranger at some time. Likewise, think about people who have harmed you badly that were strangers, or has harmed you badly who weren't friends first and weren't, right? They start as strangers. The boss who fired you for no good reason, the the person you're walking you're trying to do something, you're walking through town, and for some reason they look over at you and they have a really nasty expression on their face and you don't know why. Now these people that started out as neutral, you didn't care how it turns out for them, become enemies because you think they harmed you somehow. So most of our, actually really all of our friends, all of our enemies, they start as strangers, don't they? So all of our friends start as strangers, all of our enemies start as strangers. So why is it that we're completely indifferent to all of these beings? It's simply because they haven't helped us yet and they haven't harmed us yet. You see how unstable this is? It's an extremely unstable situation. This attitude of being completely indifferent, it's not based on much. And next, think about your enemies. And it's good to think about an enemy who's complex. And when I say enemy, I don't mean like a kung fu movie. I mean an enemy is someone who's harmed you, who you now is a person you don't like very much, or maybe you dislike a great deal. So hopefully you've lived long enough, or at least you know of other people who, in a non-delusional way, right? Not because they're have something wrong with with them as a person, but out of genuine forgiveness has reconciled with an enemy, right? So from time to time, you meet somebody, they hurt you quite badly, and then for good reasons, you let go of that hurt and you let go of the situation and they become a friend. Sometimes those are your best friends because you've been through difficult times together. You've been through something hard and you've forgiven each other. And now it's even more stable than it was, right? So look at how fragile this feeling of being distant from that person is. Even in the midst of them harming you, there's the potential that this person could be your best friend later on. There are so many stories like this, aren't there? So this feeling of being distant from others because they've harmed us in the past is extremely unstable. So these three feelings of feeling close to those who have benefited us, indifferent towards those who haven't done either harm or benefit, and feeling distant from people who have harmed us is based on really flimsy foundations. So the natural attitudes that we have in regards to all of the beings that appear before us is incredibly flexible. It seems so definite when it's happening, doesn't it? That no, no, I'm really close to my good friend. I'm really close to my good friend, and that person who hurt me, I'm never gonna. No, no, no. And these people that all of these other people, why would I care about these people? They haven't done anything good or bad to me. Maybe I wouldn't hurt them, but I don't really think much about how it turns out for those people. Why would I? I've got things to do, right? But these categories are so unstable, and the feeling of indifference that we have. Think about that stranger who became your best friend. How foolish was it that prior to that you didn't care how it turned out for them at all? So foolish, right? So these categories are completely equal, actually, in terms of how your ordinary attitude is unstable in regards to each one. It's unstable in regards to the enemy. It's unstable in regards to the stranger. It's unstable in regards to the dear one, to the close, to the loved one, the beloved. So now consider this also. From a Buddhist standpoint, rebirth is beginningless. In past lives, that person who's the best friend, call that person to mind. that person has been the person who killed you in the past. That person has been the one who cheated on you. You could literally just take the mind basically of your best friend and put it in the body of the enemy over there, and they've done all the stuff that person has done. And you could take the one that's on the enemy side and put it in the friend over here, or the loved one, the dear one, the mother, the father, the mentor, the brother, the sister, the child that you love so much, care about so much. The enemy over here has been that one before. And the one over here that's so dear has been the enemy before, who did all those horrible things. And by the way, the stranger has been those things too. So the stranger has been the dear child or the friend or the mother or the father. And so has the enemy. The enemy's been over there too. So across lifetimes, this is incredibly unstable, right? Sometimes you're close, sometimes you're distant, sometimes you hurt each other, sometimes you help each other. It changes over and over and over and over again. It's so unstable, just like it changes in this lifetime. As time goes on, it changes across lifetimes. So this thing where we feel super unbelievably close to the people that are helping us, we don't care at all really how it turns out for everyone else, and how we feel really distant and disgusted and repulsed by those who have harmed us. This is incredibly unstable. So on the other hand, if you look at these three categories, if you look at these three people you've called to mind, what is the real situation? What's stable across lifetimes, across harm, across help, across total indifference, the people who aren't harming and helping? What's actually consistent? Isn't it true that your enemy has a deep desire for happiness, meaning, purpose? They also want those things. They're pursuing those things. They just don't know how to get those things. And isn't it true they're also deeply suffering? Isn't it true that if your enemy was completely happy and satisfied, not in some weird way where they got to hurt everyone and whatever, but if they actually were a satisfied, content, fulfilled human being, they would have never hurt you this way? So isn't it true that not only do these beings want happiness and freedom from suffering, all three categories exactly the same? Your best friend, the stranger, the one who's harmed you, all three are exactly the same in this regard. Not only that, but actually it would be better for you if all three categories had happiness and freedom from suffering, because the enemy wouldn't harm, the stranger would be very helpful and generous and kind and all of these things, and the friend of course would stay in a stable condition as the helpful friend. How wonderful would it be? We're now finally at that first equanimity mind. How wonderful would it be, right? If they were free from attachment and aversion. How wonderful would it be if they didn't have these drives that are causing them to harm so many people and being indifferent to so many people and feeling so close to certain people that they're willing to harm other people for the ones they like so much? Because this is the dark side of having good friends, is that you're willing to hurt other people for the sake of your friends, aren't you? Right? So it's incredible to think that in reality, the dear friend is completely equal to the enemy in terms of wanting happiness and freedom from suffering. And when those two swap from lifetime to lifetime, where now the one who is harming you is the same mind stream as now the one who's helping you, right? Likewise, in that condition, the enemy, who's now your dear friend, wants happiness and freedom from suffering. The stranger wants happiness, freedom from suffering. And the dear friend, who's now the enemy in another life, wants happiness, freedom from suffering. So across lives, this stays completely stable. So this thing of wanting genuine, deep fulfillment, satisfaction, and this thing of genuinely wanting to be free of meaningless kinds of pain and difficulty, suffering, discomfort, stays the same across lifetimes, across this entire lifetime. And furthermore, as I said, if each of these beings had that, it would be better for you. So the only rational response actually is to feel that these categories are equal in terms of this thing. Your attitude of being super close to one, not caring about the other, and being distant from the other makes no sense at all. But the attitude of feeling that these three categories are equal and equally deserving, and that it would be equally beneficial if each of these categories had actual happiness, right? That stays stable under every condition. So the only rational response to the way that things actually are in reality, not because Buddha said so or whatever, but in reality, is to have a feeling that these categories are equal. And that all of this time that we've spent feeling that only those who help me and are nice to me and do good things for me, those are the ones that I'm going to help, completely inappropriate. And feeling completely indifferent to billions of others, trillions of others who haven't helped and haven't harmed, completely inappropriate and disconnected from how things are, disconnected from reality. And likewise, feeling completely distant and wanting the enemy or those who harmed us to suffer and to do badly, completely disconnected from reality. Now, this doesn't mean that if someone kills other people, that you treat them exactly like your wife or your child, because they're harming others. You have to do something else, right? What it means is that when you put someone in prison, you don't just put them in prison to make them suffer. You put them in prison because you need to protect them from doing more non virtue, and you need to protect others from suffering because that person can't control themselves. And you need to give that person as many tools and so forth as you can so that while they're isolated and away from circumstances where they'll harm others so much, that they can develop and become better so that when they come out, they don't harm people again, right? So the attitude of equanimity already is fixing like a huge number of problems and is very practical. It's not at all like floating on a rainbow or and riding a unicorn in to save everyone from themselves or something. It's very practical and very powerful. So even though you could fully address the criminal, even though you could fully address the one that's harming, even though you could do exactly what's needed to stop someone from harming another being or stop them from harming you, that inappropriate feeling of distance that would create harm, extra harm for you and for that other being, goes away just with this first mind. You see it? Mm. Okay, my friends, while you're marinating on equanimity, we will wrap up this session. And for those of you who are interested, uh, as soon as this session ends, you'll get a link to go to movie night. And there's a wonderful film by, uh, well, I won't say more than this, but there's a wonderful film that has a bunch of Buddhist themes in it. That anyone who's on this stream, you can jump over and watch that movie with everyone who's here and everyone who's coming from the Discord where I put up the link earlier.